Greetings to you all. Welcome to Back to Ashes. My name is Phoenix. Thank you to the reformed members of the channel. Interscare Wifey, Denise S., Through Scrutiny, Samantha Play, Stephanie McLaren, Corpse Lover, Normandy W., Christy Elias, Cindy Cleveland, and Patty's niece. If you would like to become a member of Back to Ashes or would like to buy me a coffee as a special thank you, that link can be found down below. If you are new to the channel or haven't done so already, please don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and comment, as it does help the channel out and remind you of every time I upload a video. With all of that being said, it is time to go back to ashes. For once we arise from the ashes, we are a bigger, brighter, stronger, and a happier person in the morning. Sit back, relax, kick back, grab your snacks, or tuck in and get warm and prepare for this dose of vocal melatonin entitled True Let's Not Meet Stories. After this intro, an ad will play. I'll read the first story an ad will play, and after that there will be no more ads within this video. I was 19 years old when this took place. It wasn't overly late, probably about 8 p.m., but it was winter, so it was already dark. I was walking home from visiting a friend, and about 20 minutes from home. It was quiet, and I had headphones in, just listening to music, so I didn't hear this guy approach from behind me. All of a sudden, this cyclist has slammed his brakes on directly beside me, and is staring at me. I take my headphones out and glance at him, but he doesn't speak. He just stares. I keep walking. I'm pretty close to home now, so I wasn't too worried. This guy starts cycling again, slowly now, matching my walking speed. I keep my eyes forward and ignore him, fully aware he's still looking at me. To get to my flat, I had to walk down these really quiet, dark country lanes, and although it wasn't very long, it wasn't an ideal place to be with this guy. So I stopped and glanced down at my phone, hoping he'd keep going. He did, for a short while, but then he stopped and turned to watch me. There was no way I was walking down that lane with this guy there. So I crossed the street and went down another road, a well-lit one with lots of houses, hoping it was safer. That's when he said something that chilled me to my core. "Where are you going? You don't live that way. I know where you live." I wanted to be sick. He could have been bluffing, but the way he said it, I believed him. I was terrified. I dialed my partner's number and kept walking, aware of this guy following me even now. When my partner answered, I quietly asked him to come get me when I heard the guy go, "Oh shit," and he cycled off ahead of me. I don't know what startled him so much. I guess it was because he thought I was calling the police, but he took off and I'm forever grateful he did. Creepy cyclist. Let's never meet again. When I was little, 4th or 5th grade maybe, I walked home from the bus stop after school. I did this every day, and I thought that my neighborhood was completely safe. Everyone there was usually very nice. Plus, the bus stop was only a block or so away from my house at the time, so it was a short distance. I hadn't realized that, at the time, there were a lot of kidnappings and or attempted kidnappings going on in the area. The school sent out the obligatory emails and phone calls informing the parents of the situation, but it had yet to reach me. So, one day, I'm on my merry way home and I notice a blue truck heading the opposite direction. I shrugged it off, as cars always passed me whenever I walked home, though the truck turned around at the first corner it could. I thought it strange, but I tried to rationalize it as they probably forgot something. I was wrong. The truck, now going in the same direction I was also going at around the same speed as I was. This weirded me out, so I picked up the pace. I could hear the truck's engine accommodate to the speed, slightly picking up as well. After that, I booked it. I ran as quickly as I could to my home, and I could hear the truck's engine roar as it got faster. I somehow made it back to my house and slammed and locked the door as quickly as I possibly could. I was so grateful that my mom left the door unlocked that day, especially since I'd been trying to get her to leave it locked so I could use my new house key. I know this story isn't as exciting or as major as most of the other stories here, but at the time, it scared the ever-living shit out of me. Some context first. This story took place in 2020, when I was 18 years old. I lived in a relatively safe neighborhood, but my country does have a high crime rate in general, so take that with a pinch of salt. My dad had passed away earlier in the year, and I had no siblings, so my mom and I lived alone in our house. The COVID lockdowns were still in place, but as certain restrictions were lifted, people were starting to return to work. Between my house and the train tracks was a stretch of empty field. It became a safe, quiet space for me to escape to whenever I needed to get out of the house. I would normally sit there once a day for a cigarette or two, sometimes for a little picnic. My home situation was complicated, to say the least, and due to the pandemic, I had nowhere else to go. On this particular day, I went there for a few minutes to smoke, as always. I was about halfway done through my cigarette when I noticed a young man walking along the train tracks on the other side of the field. He was barefoot and wearing dirty, worn-out clothes. He noticed me and made a hand gesture suggesting that he was asking for a smoke. I should have left, but as a teenager, I found it difficult to say no to people. I walked across the field and handed him a smoke. He took it from me, and I immediately felt uneasy with the way he was looking at me. He asked me, "Do you live in that house over there?" and pointed at my house. I avoided answering the question, and at this point realized that I needed to leave. I had left from my front gate that day. For him to know where I lived, he must have watched me leave from the back gate before. I told him I needed to get going. He started insisting on giving me a hug to say thank you, and I declined several times. At this point, I turned around and started walking away quickly. I didn't get very far. He caught up to me and put his arm around my waist. I panicked, not knowing what to do. All I could think of was that I needed to get away from him. As I tried to start running, he grabbed me from behind and started dragging me toward the row of houses, where the view from the road is completely blocked. The fences were high, too, so no one could see the field from their backyards. We were completely isolated. I was kicking and struggling, desperate to get out of his grasp. He ended up throwing me on the ground, with him on top of me, still holding on. In a split second, my life flashed before my eyes. That feeling that something terrible was about to happen came over me. I couldn't escape. He was too strong. My arms were trapped by his, and he was holding me down, so I couldn't kick him. I did the only thing left to do, and I started screaming for help. Suddenly, I was free. I could move. He had let go and jumped off of me. He ran away. My heart was still pounding. I was shaking, in shock from what had just happened to me. He disappeared into the industrial area on the other side of the train tracks. I immediately ran towards the road. As I reached it, I noticed it was empty. There were no cars parked in my neighbor's driveways. No one heard me screaming. And had he realized, that day could have had a far worse ending. He knew where I lived, and I was terrified of him returning. For months, I had panic attacks and nightmares, and I could barely leave my house without breaking down. I moved away from there a year later, but I still sometimes get scared when I'm home alone or walking around town. Thankfully, I never saw him again, and I hope that I never will. This happened many years ago, but I've just discovered that the person in question has been released from prison. In my mid-20s, I was bouncing around. I couldn't settle on what to do, and after a long and creepy relationship, was mostly interested in just having fun. I was at uni, but wasn't the most committed student. I had been working at a restaurant in a hotel, but hated it. And a friend told me about working as a receptionist in a brothel. It's completely legal where I live. And said the money was decent. It fit in well with uni. It wasn't difficult. And if clients were rude, you could just kick them out. Unlike hospitality, where you had to be polite all the damn time. I found a place that was looking for receptionists and went for an interview and got the job. And it was fine. I mean, not the most interesting job in the world, but it paid okay. I could smoke out the back when cigarettes didn't cost $50 a pack. I could study if it was quiet. And I know what everyone is thinking at this point. Receptionist is code for sex worker. And I promise you, it isn't. I have no proof, but lying about it doesn't make the story any better. In fact, if I were a sex worker, it might be an even more interesting story. Sadly, no such excitement in my life. We had regular clients, and all had reputations of some kind. This guy only books half an hour, but always extends his bookings at least once. This guy will pay extra for dirty talk. A lot of it was innocuous, just information passed between people that we, as receptionists, always heard about. But some of it was more along the lines of a warning. This guy will try and remove the condom. This guy wants to spank, but won't ask first. And then there was the doctor. The doctor had a lot of money and would potentially book multiple workers for a long time. He paid well for reasonably boring extras, like fancy lingerie or fantasy roleplay, aka nurse's uniform, but he had a big red warning sign above his head. The first time he came in, one of the other receptionists warned me, no one has to do an intro with him if they don't want to. Warn the girls, it's the doctor. I called the intro, i.e. I went into the staff room and said, intro in meeting room 1, which generally meant that every available worker should go in, say their name, flirt, whatever. After which, one of the receptionists would find out who they wanted to see and how long for. And all the workers stood up and then said, it's the doctor. And all but 2 sat back down. So immediately I asked what the deal is, and they explained what he likes. Cocaine. He likes workers who like, or pretend to like, cocaine. And he's a neurosurgeon who gets access to weird drugs, and often his cocaine is far from pure. Not cut with drain cleaner, but cut with pharmaceuticals like amnestics used for surgery. He also enjoyed drug insertion. I'm sure you can fill in the blanks. He was sometimes belligerent if workers refused him after they started the booking. And he was just creepy. When we'd go in to check with him, he'd try and grab us, make us, the receptionists, sit down. And to be clear, I'm not what people would consider attractive. Plus, he'd do it with all the receptionists. He'd grab our hands and try and stroke our arms. He had this super intense stare, like a mannequin, that could only make eye contact. I know that sounds weird, but it's hard to describe. It's like he was staring right into you, but also not seeing you at all. His expressions were weird and didn't work on his face. Like his mouth would smile or move, but his eyes wouldn't change from the intense stare. I guess it might have been the cocaine, but it was deeply unsettling and just made you feel sick. Having said all that, there were a few experienced workers who knew how to handle him, get the most out of him, whilst experiencing the least possible risk. It's possible to fake snorting a line. I did not know this before that point. Hence giving workers the option to meet the client. I can't remember if he saw anyone that first time. If I recall correctly, he had a handful of bookings in that time I was working there. We did have strict instructions not to ever let anyone do an outcall with him, that is, booking at anywhere other than the brothel. Plus, we had a few other harm minimization strategies. Then, after a while, one of the workers who was okay with seeing him left to go traveling, and no one else would see him. So he gradually stopped coming in, as no one would intro him. I moved on to receptioning at a different brothel. A new one had opened closer to where I lived, and the pay was better. And he showed up again there. I knew he would frequent all the places he could, until his reputation overtook him. When he showed up at the new place, I told all the workers about him, and no one was okay with seeing him. He only tried a couple more times before he abandoned us. A year or so later, I had moved on to a different job. I couldn't do night shifts anymore, and I was chatting with a friend from the brothel who said, "Oh my God, did you hear about the doctor? He killed someone and got arrested." And it was true. The doctor had killed a worker who had been sent to his apartment. The worker lay dead in his bed for 2 days. Officially, it was manslaughter, and he also pled guilty to supplying the drug that killed another worker. All this happened because A, he's a troubled dumpster fire of a human being, and B, because one awful brothel manager, and the owners behind her, put profits in front of safety and kept sending workers to bookings with him without giving them full warnings, and specifically sending inexperienced workers, and without keeping them in-house. It later came out that the medical board had known of his cocaine addiction for many years prior to his arrest and had helped cover up some botched surgeries. It was horrifying to hear about, and we both spent some time telling stories we knew about him, but then I mostly forgot about it. Then I was chatting to an old friend the other day who reminded me of him, and I got on Google. I found out that he's been released from prison. I hope not practicing medicine, but he could be anywhere now. So, murdering drug-addicted, now free former neurosurgeon? Let's not meet ever again. Alaska is the perfect place to go if you want to get away from the rest of the world. As America's least densely populated state, you have plenty of breathing room from any kind of authority or prying eyes that may want to know what you're up to. For this reason, my home state is very attractive to all sorts of weird and unsavory groups. I've stumbled across Scientology centers at the end of a dirt back road, while nothing else was around for miles. Heard stories from doomsday preppers who claim to have bunkers made out of shipping containers in the side of mountains, and met people who have come out of religious cults in the interior that wanted to keep their followers away from any contact with the outside world. All of this and more you can find in Alaska. I was born and raised in Anchorage, the only big city in the state. Growing up, we had about 250,000 people in the city. It takes about 30 minutes tops to drive across. So that gives you an idea for what we up north consider a big city. The only other real city in the state is Fairbanks. Those two cities are connected by 360 miles of a 2-lane highway. It takes a 7-hour drive one way to get between them through one of the most beautiful landscapes on the planet. Mountains rise up either side of you between Anchorage and Denali National Park before you drive through these colossal canyons carved out of the rock over tens of thousands of years by melting glaciers and rivers. Past Denali is another 3 hours of driving through a vast, flat interior plain with mountains in the distance. I say all of this to help you understand just how desolate it feels in the Alaska. even on the highway. After you get out of Anchorage or Fairbanks, there is nothing but wilderness as far as the eye can see, save for the occasional small town with a max population of about 1,000 people on a good day. 10 years back, it was even less. Alaskan girls are built tough. We change tires, hunt, fish, camp, and generally have a great appreciation for the great outdoors that women in the lower 48 don't really have if they're near a city. The joke is that Anchorage is the biggest rural city in the country. All this brings context to the following story. In high school, things were different, or at least they felt different. I was a young and stupid woman who thought I could conquer anything due to the aforementioned built-tough attitude I was raised with. Senior year of high school, I decided to treat myself to a camping trip into the mountains up past Akita. Nothing fancy, just an overnight or two in the most beautiful state at the most beautiful time of the year, mid-June. Going up north in peak summer has had a weird feeling to it. The sun never really sets. If you've ever seen the movie Midsummer, that's what it's like. It gets to about dusk and that's it. It's still bright and sunny out the whole night though. Shout out to readers in the far north of Scandinavia and Greenland. The false sense of security I had thinking that the midnight sunlight would mean safety probably nearly got me killed or worse. My second mistake was not telling anyone where I was going. I just packed up for a trip, stopped at Subway for a lunch, and headed out into the great beyond. The drive was fine. A solid 2.5 hours of driving north along the highway took up most of the afternoon as I jammed out to the greatest hits from the radio on Cool 97.3. After you get through the Matsu Valley, you get into the mountains again. Tall spruce and evergreen trees line the road on both sides, with the occasional empty space where there has been some clear-cut logging. All of this gives you a sense that while you're out in the wilderness, you are still connected to civilization in some way. This led me to my biggest mistake, not staying at a state park campground. I was in high school with only a part-time job and didn't want to pay the $15 overnight camp fee and was too scared to risk the fine. So I found a spot that looked good and pulled off the road. The map I got from my dad said there was an old mining site up a nearby mountain, so I decided that would be the best spot to head to for an overnight. My logic must have been that it was badass to spend a night in a mining ghost town or something. I pulled off the road, packed up my backpack, put on some bug spray, grabbed my map and compass, and started off into the woods. Now, this hadn't been the first time I had done this. I've been on wilderness backpacking trips on my own with my dad throughout my childhood. I knew my orientation skills and had taken some wilderness survival courses at camp. I wasn't just some dumb blonde wandering off into the woods with no idea of where I was, or so I thought. A solid 45-minute hike up into the hills, and I finally made it to where the old mining camp was supposed to be. There was nothing there, just an old concrete foundation with some holes in it and nothing else. I was very disappointed, but unsurprised at the outcome. I set up camp off in the woods and set to building a fire for dinner on the concrete slab. Here, you're supposed to set up cooking a ways off from your camp, just in case bears are nosy. Last thing you want is a 1,300-pound grizzly poking his nose in your tent, wondering why you smell like Campbell's soup and s'mores. By this time, it was getting late, about 10 p.m., but the sun was still high in the sky. And by the time dinner was over, it was nearly 11. I was starving and dug in. About an hour later, it was about as dark as it was going to get, so I hunkered down in my tent for the night, confident that the overgrowth was private enough for whatever animals might come out around then. I woke to noises in the distance and slow-moving crashing through the underbrush. My first thought was hunters. My dad and I had run into a few on some campouts, so it wasn't uncommon. I relaxed and figured they would just pass through without incident and close my eyes again. That's when they found my fire pit. A man's voice cried out into the brightish forest. "Who the hell is camping on our property?" I froze. I knew I had messed up and was getting up, grabbing my purse and putting on my shoes so I could go apologize before I heard the main man again. "When we find you, you're effing dead. You're on private militia property, and trespassers get shot." That's when the whole situation changed. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't just pack up my tent and shit with some armed guy lurking around. I carefully put my shoes on, put my keys in my purse, and slunk away into the underbrush as quietly as I could. My thought was to slip away, wait until they got bored and left, then go back, pack up, and leave. I spent 20 minutes hunkered behind a log in the woods, barely an earshot before I heard a second voice calling for the others. They had found my tent and were tearing it apart, going through my stuff. I heard one shout out, "Bed's still warm." And trespassers, a chick. She left her underwear. The first man shouted out, "Okay, fan out and find her. Bitch thinks she can trespass, then there's gonna be hell to pay." At that point, I wasn't concerned that I had left my spare change of underwear in my bag or that these creepy guys had found it. I needed to get out of there. Quietly, I made my way down the mountain for a good 30 minutes, tiptoeing and taking care not to step on twigs or make a ruckus. After the rustling and shouting of the men had faded quite a bit, I said to hell with it and booked it out as fast as I could into the midnight sun down the hills. I tripped and fell and got scraped up more times than I'd care to remember. Finally, I made it back to the road, but much to my horror, there was no car. I knew I had come up or down that road from where I had been. I couldn't quite remember where I was at the time, but picked a direction and started walking. I rounded a corner on the road and saw my car, and the two men standing beside it. They were armed and dressed in surplus military gear. I hid in the brush on the side of the road and watched. A while later, several more men appeared from the trail I had taken. They dumped all of my stuff next to my car, hopped back onto their ATVs, and drove off. I went up to my car, careful not to be seen, and found a note on my dashboard. It read something like, "If we ever catch you on our property again, we won't hesitate to use force. Consider this a warning." I went back to start loading stuff into my car and noticed what they had done. They cut up or destroyed all of my gear, probably as punishment for trespassing. Honestly, I'm thankful they did that because I'm grateful I didn't get shot. Ever since then, I have taken great care to camp only in designated camping areas. To the weird Alaskan militia group, I hope you weren't actually going to kill me, but nevertheless, let's not meet. I was watching my daughter's kids while she and her husband go out of town. They have a teenage daughter. Let's just call her Alyssa for the sake of it. At like 3 a.m., I'm awoken by a weird rustling sound and look out the window and see movement. I saw a boy emerge from the bushes on the side of the house. I saw a bike tossed on the lawn that definitely wasn't ours. My first thought was that it was a burglar casing houses, but since he looked young and came through on a bike, I figured scaring him straight would be enough for him to decide to head home. I didn't want to ruin a teenager's life by calling the cops straight away. So I went out on the porch, flipped the lights on, and said, "Can I help you?" in my classroom voice. The guy looked surprised, but not nervous. He was wearing a Letterman-style jacket, but once I got a clear view of him in the streetlights, he seemed much older than my granddaughter, gruff and more wiry than athletic. I walked up closer to the house and said, "Yeah, I'm looking for Alyssa." I gave him a disapproving glare, hoping he'd realize he came looking for a girl late at night, and the grumpy old person answered, "It's time to split." I'm thinking what must have happened is Alyssa knew her parents were going out of town, and before she knew I'd be staying over, told a secret older boyfriend to come over. It was late, and I was alone with several kids, so I didn't want him coming any closer to the house. I also thought it was weird he came so late and wanted to be sure Alyssa actually wanted to talk to him. So I said, "I'm sorry, who?" And he said, "Alyssa. You know, Alyssa last name. This is her house." I thought he knew her full name. They must at least be friends. I said, "You wait here." He started to walk up, and I felt a sick burning in my gut. Instinct kicked in. I yelled, "No! Stop! Freeze!" Then readjusted and said, "You stay right there. This is private property. Don't take a step closer. Wait there." So I go in, and Alyssa is asleep, just one room over from where the rustling first occurred. And I wake her up and say something to the effect of, "I don't know what the big idea was to have friends over this time of night, but you tell them to go home." She had no clue what I was talking about. I said, "There's a guy standing outside asking for you." Confused, she gets up and goes to the window. She sees him and goes white as a sheet. He asked for me?" "Yeah." "By name?" "Yes." "Call the police. I've never seen him before in my life." I called 911 immediately, but as I was on the phone with them, Alyssa started tugging at my arm. "He's coming up." I had younger kids in the house to think about, so I kept the door latched and pulled it just open enough for the latch and yelled. "I asked my husband, and none of us know an Alyssa last name. Leave my property or I'm calling 911. He got angry and started yelling for her to come out. Thankfully, the police came pretty quickly, and when he heard the sirens, he grabbed the bike and ran off. I watched where he was running off, and he jumped into the passenger side of a car without headlights or front plates and sped off. The police followed in the same direction once I pointed them, but they didn't get him. They advised us to take all her social media details offline if she was sure she didn't know this person, and said they'd had a couple similar reports recently and were looking into it. I got a heavy-duty lock, and she slept in my room for the remainder of my visit. So, this was May 2017. My husband Jim and I own a 5-floor, 100-year-old building, which has our business in it, an antique mall, our apartment upstairs, and various other tenants. We'd had several back-to-back burglaries in the prior years and had reinforced the front doors of the business pretty intensely. Aggressive steel bars, more cameras, etc. Anyway, at 3 a.m., we were sound asleep upstairs, as one is. But then we got a call from Sonatrol, our security company. We had a motion detect in an unusual location. Not the main floor where 90% of the jewelry is, but downstairs. That sort of thing is usually a spider on the camera or a mouse or some shit. So we ran out less than prepared. I was only wearing a tank top, undies, and flip-flops. Jim did not grab his baseball bat, but at least he had on pants. I went one way to check the front door, which was intact, and Jim went to the other to check around back. Suddenly, he called me and said, "Someone's inside." So I fumbled with my phone trying to call 911. In that situation, your monkey brain is in the driver's seat and the phone is in the black monolith from 2001. Finally, I managed it and rounded the backside of the building, narrating to the 911 operator. Broken glass, broken window. I said, as I later heard during the run-up to the trial, "Oh my God, they're in here. Please come now." Then there was an unholy crash. It sounded like everything inside was being smashed to bits. The feeling of listening to someone busy destroying your livelihood is something I cannot quite capture. Who was in there? How many? What path of destruction was being wrecked? I could only yell down the phone at a faceless voice, begging for people that I knew was still minutes away. Bear in mind, I was freshly woken into a horrible situation, barely clothed, and it was escalating by the second. As it turned out, the burglar, Troy, had come face to face with Jim, trying to exit the building out the broken window before I'd arrived. They locked eyes and Troy said, "Oh, shit," and reversed direction back into the depths of the building. Then he dropped his backpack with stolen merch, flung himself bodily over a giant iron gate, smashed through the restaurant tenants' doors, and then subsequently out their main door. At that point, he'd caught a lot of glass to the face and body and was bleeding pretty good. Jim caught him on the next exit and freaking pounced on him. Full body slam to the cement. Then he pinned Troy. Adrenaline is wild. I was not crying, but urgently begging the operator to hurry, hurry, hurry. I was terrified. I was going to see my husband die before my eyes. And then I ran right into the fray because, again, adrenaline. It gets right up on you, and you just do the stupidest shit. They were in the middle of the street, dimly orange lit by the streetlights, and it was hard to parse what was going on. Freaking thank sweet baby Jesus. Troy did not have a weapon and was wildly unprepared to have a madman tackle him in the dark. As it turned out, he had done hundreds of burglaries and never been caught. Jim had the upper hand and had him fully pinned down, and Troy was wisely playing possum. Suddenly, we heard a roaring engine and someone laying rubber. Apparently, I started screaming. Yeah, it was Troy's getaway driver, his wife, Kelsey. She leaned out her window and yelled, "Get the F off of him or I'm gonna kill the bitch." That was me, the bitch. Clearly captured on audio, but I don't remember. Not willing to wait, she then tried to run me over. I vaguely remember realizing things were going horribly wrong, but desperately trying to read the license plate into the phone with an idiotic laser focus. I was out of state, and I struggled to read it. That's all. My brain deleted how close she come to turning me into a bloody smear. Within maybe a foot of me, fast, while I dodged like a badly clothed matador, clutching my phone. We had to listen to the 911 recording a year later in the prosecutor's office, synced with the video. The video was from a nearby business with really good exterior cameras. Jim started crying. He had no idea what a close call it was. The engine revving overwhelmed my screaming at a certain point. My voice was blown out. I was trying to chant the license plate like an incantation, but you can't hear it because the engine roar and the squealing tires. Jim let Troy go, of course. Troy jumped into the car and they tore off down the street. The police showed up about a minute later, but they were gone. Anyway, Troy had bled all over Jim from the door glass. Jim freaked out so hard later. We figured Troy was likely using IV drugs. Correctly, as it turned out. And I had to inspect Jim for cuts using a flashlight to make sure I didn't miss anything. He still got tested. Unlike a number of other incidents, this one was taken pretty seriously due to the amount of evidence as well as violence and, the attempted murder. Several months later, they arrested Troy and Kelsey. They had Troy's DNA from the bloody clothes Jim was wearing and all over the car they'd been driving, which had been stolen but ditched. It turned out they were wanted in 5 counties for hundreds of commercial burglaries over several years to support their oxy habits. That was back before the age of Fetty or fentanyl. We were the only mess up they made. They didn't know we lived on the premises. Kelsey, the wife, flipped on Troy. They accepted a plea for her, much to my displeasure, since she was the one who tried to kill me. At least she ratted him out 6 ways till Sunday. He refused a plea. He wanted a trial. I would not wish a trial on my worst enemy. You get interviewed, alone, by the defense team. Did you know they can lie? They sure can. They won't in front of the jury, but one-on-one, they'll eat your soul and pick their teeth with the shards. You don't get a lawyer. You're on team prosecution. Theoretically, I can understand it, but it's still utterly maddening. They took me first. They played the 911 tape. Second time I'd heard it. They insisted that because I kept saying they're inside, that I was lying and there was someone else, not Troy or Kelsey. Sorry, I just used it as a non-gendered pronoun, guys. I hadn't yet seen the person, so they were a they, which is what I told them, adamantly. Then they took Jim. They told Jim that I admitted I'd lied and there was another person inside the building. He luckily laughed and was like, absolutely the hell not, she didn't. Finally, the day before trial, Troy accepted a plea. Thank God. I'd been having the stupidest meltdown ever. Do I dye my hair something other than purple? I just spent $700 on it. What shoes do I wear? I don't have conservative shoes. How can I cover my tattoos? Basically, the most pointless shit I could control because the train was rolling on without me. Kelsey got off with probation. Troy was in prison from 2017 to 2020 until he got released early, adjacent to COVID. Kelsey seems to be clean and living a normal life, remarried with kids and looks happy. I watch her on Facebook. I really hope so. I do occasionally wish she has a raging case of hemorrhoids or something, though. I'm not a saint. About 2 years ago, I moved from my college town in Arizona to Woodland Hills, California, for my new job, no longer living there. I was 21 and living alone in a studio within 2 blocks of an outdoor mall and gym. The apartments were older, built in the mid-70s, but well-maintained with a fence and cameras around the entire complex and gated entrances. It was a fairly nice area, mostly young professionals and families, and it felt pretty safe. After this incident, I refused to be at my apartment complex alone after dark. One night, I decided to take a walk after my workout. It was barely nightfall and still fairly warm. I grabbed my water bottle and started walking past the gym in the opposite direction of my apartment. Walked for a little while, turned around, and started walking home. That's when I noticed a white Escalade with completely blacked out windows that had passed me previously. Passed me again. They drove down to the light and made the turn, so I thought nothing of it. Only when I saw the car for a third time did I start to panic. By this point, it was well past dark, and most people were headed home from the gym and the outdoor mall. I was still a few blocks from the gym, and the car kept driving past, slowing down and speeding back up if they saw anyone around. I cut through a parking lot to try to get to the closest store open, a McDonald's. Before I knew it, the Escalade was back and in the parking lot between me and the McDonald's. The car started slowly circling the parking lot, and the windows rolled down part way to reveal three men in their 30s to 40s just staring at me. At that point, I was frozen and decided to stand under a light by a closed store while frantically trying to call my friend from the apartment complex to come get me. My mom, friends from other states, anyone, so I wasn't alone. The Escalade kept circling and slowing down to barely an idle every time they passed me. I saw the door of McDonald's open and a younger guy come out, clearly done with his shift and headed to his car. I started yelling for him to wait, and I needed help and took off running towards him. The Escalade sped up out of the parking lot, back to the nearest light, and turned again. I apologized to the younger guy for scaring him and asked if he could please walk me to my gym, thinking the men were probably gone and I could wait a few minutes there before walking back to my apartment. We got to the gym and he made sure I felt safe there before going back to his car. I waited for 10 minutes, still trying to reach my friend who lived in my complex so he could come get me. Wasn't able to get a reply from him, so I called one of my girlfriends from back home to talk and started walking the rest of the way home. I got past the main intersection before the car turned down my road and started following me again. My heart sank, and I had a horrible feeling that if I didn't get inside the gate before they got to me, I'd never be seen again. I broke into a sprint and screamed into my phone, "I'm being followed," for my friend not to hang up. The gate had just started to close behind another resident's car, and I barreled through it, sprinting the full way back to my apartment and locking the door. About 3 hours later, I went to take my dog to go potty before bed, and out of curiosity, or sheer stupidity, I walked back towards the gate I came running through, still safe within the fence. I saw the Escalade parked on the other side of the road, waiting just outside the camera's field of view. I calmly turned and walked my dog on the interior of apartment complex, out of their sight. They came back to the same spot every night for several days, and then I never saw them again. So guys who try to kidnap me, I hope I never meet you again. I don't really know how to make or begin this, but I will try. English is my second language, so I'm sorry if there's any goof-ups within the story. Also, these memories are quite faint, so I can't remember exactly everything to a T. When I was younger, around 8 or so, we moved to a new neighborhood. Same state, same general area, but completely new people. At the age of 8, I was near completely defenseless. This will matter later on. Because I had lost my leg to a car accident 3 years prior, and I was still learning to use my prosthetic leg. My house was the furthest one on the street, with only one way to the house, down the street. There were many houses that were very close to the street, and people could basically talk to you through their walls. They were so close. I had never minded this until I caught someone looking at me as I walked down the road. I thought of it as nothing. Must have just been someone watching the road and animals. I was wrong. I walked alone down the road every time. My parents could trust me to go by myself, and I just decided to not ask them to pick me up because of my leg. It was one single day that scared the ever-living shit out of me. The dude was on the left side of the street, and I was on the right, next to him. He just looked at me, and I guess he found me cute because of the look on his face and how he said, and I wish he never had, "Hey, sweetie." I don't know him. He doesn't know me. And this just weirded me the F out. I had a weird hairstyle and color, a lot of color, not going down too much, and mainly in front of my face, ending at the eye, with a whitish color. It was rare, and people had called me cute when I was younger, and hearing "sweetie" wasn't a rare occurrence, but the way he said it freaked me out. It freaked me out because behind his voice, I could hear not great intent toward me. I almost began running when he said that, but I just kept on walking like it was nothing. He didn't move, just watched me as I went back home. His house was close to the intersection where my bus parked off, which makes this a lot more worse. Every day for around a month, I would walk down the street and see him watching me. Every day for longer and more obviously. It was one day that he was in the middle of the road looking at me. I wasn't very tall nor muscular at all, so I was defenseless against a 40-ish-year-old man. He just looked at me, and as I walked by him, he turned around and began to follow me. I ran, fast, but he caught up, and next thing I know, he tugged on my backpack and I fell over. He kept me down on the ground, and he looked around to make sure there was no one nearby, and dragged me near his house. And then luck had just hit like a train. As he was trying to drag me, a man was leaving his house, parallel to the perv's house. He saw and immediately began to sprint to me and help, and the perv just ran back into his house, fast. The other man began to scream at the man, and he just picked me up, set me down on my feet, and said, "Go back home before he tries something else, yeah?" I ran back to my house and told my dad, who was not happy. I don't know what happened after, but all I know is that I never saw that man again. So, creepy 40-year-old man, let's not meet again. One night, I think April of last year, I was home alone and craving some chips. Fortunately, there was a gas station near my mom's house, about a 5-minute walk. I struggle with binge eating disorder. I have way better control now. So my parents tried to keep junk food out of the house to prevent me from binging on them. So what I would do is wait for them to go to my brother's hockey practice or game, then buy snacks from the gas station and hide the garbage in my room. Anyways, as I was walking to the store, it was quite dark outside. I think it was maybe around 8 p.m. Everything went normally. I found a bag of chips, paid for it, and started to go back home. I live in a suburban neighborhood where the roads are generally not busy at all at this time of night. But to get to the gas station, I had to walk down a busy main road, so cars were a common sight at any time. When I turned onto my mom's street, it connects into the main road, I saw a black van with tinted windows slowly following behind me. 30 seconds later, it pulled up to me and a man rolled down the window. It was dark and I couldn't pick out any of the man's features, but the tone of his voice made him sound like he was in his 30s. I don't remember exactly what he said, but it was something close to this. "Hi there. My dog Chucky ran off and I'm looking for him. He's a golden retriever. Have you seen him? No, sorry, I responded. That's all right. Say, do you want to hop in and help me look for him? It would be a big help. No, I'm busy tonight, thank you though. I lied. This was a very friendly neighborhood, and missing pets were a common occurrence, so I saw nothing wrong with what he was saying. The only reason why I said no was because I was honestly feeling lazy and just wanted to eat some chips. To me, there was nothing off or wrong about the encounter. He thanked me anyways and drove off. I got home a few seconds later, locked the door behind me, and enjoyed my chips in my room. A few days later, I was telling my friends in art class what happened, just casually bringing it up. At the time, I still saw nothing wrong with what happened, until suddenly, one of my friends, who lives in my neighborhood, Kira, seemed to freeze. He drove a black van? She asked. Yeah, I responded. I didn't know what she was getting at. I saw him the other night. He told me the same thing about the dog, except when I said no, he opened the door and tried to grab me. That was when the realization sank in. What would have happened if I had agreed to help him? What would my parents do if I never came home? Kira was on track team and I wasn't. What would have happened if he had tried to grab me or even chase after me? I was lucky he didn't. I felt sick and ended up having a bad rest of the art class. To this day, I never go on walks when it's dark out alone. This happened to my roommate and I 2 years ago when we drove into the national forest just outside of the town we live in. We go to a small college in New England, about 3 hours from any major city. For context, the forest was quite a few urban legends surrounding it, and the local community, although they do go there often, have a lot of superstitions about how to be safe while there. I had just broken up with my partner, and my roommate could sense I was feeling down. Finally, we're just around the corner, so she decided to help me get my mind off things, and suggested we go to a nice spot she had found last week and just chill and distress. We took a couple of beers with us and drove to the secluded spot in the forest. From the moment we left the main asphalt road into the forest, I saw a couple of things that unsettled me. You could see the abandoned houses of a ghost town from the higher ground the road was on. And when we saw this old doll hanging from a rope on a tree. Creepy shit, man. But we didn't really give it a second thought and just kept driving. We got to a clearing and parked our car beside some trees. Popped open the back of our SUV and started just talking and playing music. About 10 minutes into this, 2 cars appeared from the road and parked in the clearing. My friend didn't pay them any attention, instead she kept talking. But as I was facing them from where I sat, I couldn't stop seeing what they did. A guy popped out of each car, talked for a few minutes, and then I saw them take out a long object covered in a dark plastic bag from the back of one of the cars. This is when I noticed these guys had guns, and not like shotguns, which I see often in this town, but handguns. Then they started lighting the bag on fire. I told my friend to get down, and she turned around and saw them for the first time. Black smoke was rising from the bag, and between trying to keep my head down and still glances at them, I saw them take out a second object and heard them shoot at it, right before they set it on fire. I don't know how long my friend and I were lying there in silence, but it was definitely enough time to let the terror sink in and whispered to each other how much we loved each other in case this was what we thought it was. At some point, I looked up and saw that they were pointing at our car and saw them walking into the woods, maybe trying to follow our tracks or trying to look for us. All I know is that right when I told my friend to jump into the driver's seat and make a run for it, I shut the back door, and between that and the car starting up, the guys heard it and started running towards us, then ran towards one of the cars and hopped in. We went over a hill and driving way above what was safe for dirt roads on a hillside, we lost them. We drove to a neighboring town and roamed around for a while just to make sure no one was following us before we went back to our dorm. That day, we tried to make fun of the whole situation and got really drunk before finally breaking down and crying from knowing we had seen something we were not supposed to see. We were at first terrified of telling anyone, but eventually did tell officers on campus who contacted the police but never found anything. And that, dear listeners, brings a close to these true Let's Not Meet stories. If you are sleeping, I hope Slumberland is treating you comfortably. If you're awake, I hope you've enjoyed this collection. Until next time, please take care of yourselves. I'll be reading to you soon. Peace, love, and light to you all.